Hey, family, it's your sister Jocelyn here, and welcome to another episode of Faith on the Journey. If this is your first time tuning in, we welcome you. We are so glad that you are here and want you to know that we're committed to helping you strengthen your faith, heal your heart, and discover a sense of community. And we do so through a variety of ways by connecting you with a team of Christian counselors and offering trauma healing trainings across the country. You can learn about these resources and so much more by visiting our website at faithonthejourney.org. Again, that is faithonthejourney.org. Now, today I'm excited to welcome to the show a woman of God who I met at a conference a couple weeks ago. And we were just talking, and she was sharing her testimony with me. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to have you on my show. And so, this is an accomplished woman, by the way. Dr. Capri Cruz is an international mental health therapist, hypnotherapist. I haven't even heard of that term before, so she's going to have to explain that to me. Author and transformational coach. After decades of suffering the consequences of growing up in the foster care system, estranged from her family, living in mental oblivion, as she describes it, and praying her way through single motherhood, she now is a trailblazer, helping other people to fulfill their call, helping women to heal from their past. And she's going to share some of the lessons that she has learned with us today. And so I thank you, Dr. Cruz, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. I'm so glad to be here.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I wanted you to share your testimony because it sounds like you've gone through, as people say, gone through quite a bit in your life. And we'll start with foster care. You grew up in the system. You described how difficult that was for you. And so let's just kind of journey back to those younger years. When did you first enter into the foster care system and what led you there?
I was 7 years old very early on, which is a really critical time for children because it's right on the verge of when their subconscious mind and their conscious mind begins to develop. But they've been at 7 years old, they've been developed based on their subconscious programming. So it's a very critical time when me or other children end up going into foster care at that age.
And you went in there. Did you have any other siblings that you ended up being split up from?
hmm I did. I had a sister. Well, I still have a sister and a brother, but oftentimes what happens when children go into the foster care system, they become estranged. And that's what happened with my siblings. And so I lost contact with my sister at 16 years old and with my brother until probably I was in my 20s or 30s, just later on in life. And then we were still kind of estranged until maybe our late 40s and 50s. It just breaks up the family home and the connections, and you essentially become strangers.
Wow. Wow. And as a child going through this, how did that impact you to be separated from your siblings and your entire family?
It's really devastating. It's really devastating because when you're at that age. So my brother and I went into the first foster home together, and unfortunately, that was a very abusive foster home. And but after that, my brother, he was 5 years older than me, so eventually he just ran away and went on his own. But it's a burden on the relationship. It's a burden on the family. We become estranged. We become strangers. We don't know how to relate. And so once the sibling union is broken, then you are um, basically just alone. You're alone in the world. You've been taken away from your core unit family. You've been taken away from your sibling unit. And most foster homes, I would venture to say, I don't know the statistics, but probably most foster homes don't keep siblings together.
Why is that? Why would they separate knowing how difficult it is for siblings to be separated?
I would venture to say that, at least I want to believe that they're trying to do better and keep the children together. But a lot of times it's the necessity and the urgency that the children need a home and the lack of foster parents that are willing to accept a sibling group because maybe lack of space or inability to care for more than one child at a time. It's a huge responsibility to have two or more children, and oftentimes the families that have children that end up in foster care oftentimes have a larger number of siblings.
Okay. So how did you cope, Capri? You were a young 7-year-old when you first entered into the foster care system. How did you navigate the emotional distress you were going through?
I think, at that age, our brain, anytime the brain is exposed to a traumatic experience, the brain operates on its own to protect you, right? Especially so when we're under the age of 7, all we have is a subconscious mind, which means it's operating below our awareness. And then at 7, our conscious mind begins to develop, but it's not fully developed until we're 25. And our conscious mind is the part of our brain that operates from an intellectual, um, rational reasoning perspective, right? It's what makes us intelligent beings. And so at that young age, we only have a subconscious mind, which is emotionally driven, right? So if I'm exposed to abuse as a child, I don't have the logical functions of my brain to understand why this is happening to me. And so children, um, their brain ends up creating a narrative that internalizes the abuse or internalizes the negative experience. And doesn't always have to be trauma. It could just be, your parent yells at you and says, stop it, you're being a bad boy. And because the child doesn't have the rational or reasoning capacity to understand, like, oh, mom had a bad day or she's irritated, because we don't have that rationalization part of our brain developed yet, we internalize it, we personalize it, and then the brain interprets it like, I'm a bad boy, I did something wrong. And this is how children end up growing up with low self-esteem, because if those negative personalized thoughts that are subconscious, right? The brain's creating it itself. If that's not countered with a positive affirmation or logical reasoning, or if the parent doesn't come back and say, "Oh, baby, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean that," to soothe the injured ego, then the child is most likely going to grow up personalizing the trauma, the abuse, the rejection, the sense of feeling unworthy, unimportant. And this, as adults, we're byproducts of our childhood. And so when adults, talk about, which is a very popular topic these days, that I don't feel worthy, or I feel imposter syndrome, or I feel um, like I want to isolate because I don't feel like I can trust people. People aren't safe. All that's a byproduct. It's a reflection of what we've experienced at some point in the past. And usually it's during childhood.
Wow, that's a lot that you just dropped on us, and
Yeah.
we don't even realize that's working in the background of our lives and a lot of the decisions we
Yeah.
might even be making now or issues we're struggling with now. And for you,
Hmm.
fast forwarding, and I know there's so much to your story that we're trying to squeeze in. You mentioned being a single mom. When did that happen in
Hmm.
your story?
Before I answer that, I want to go back because I think I missed something that you just asked me. You asked me, how did I cope? And how I coped was, the reason I was explaining the brain is that my brain essentially went into a state of oblivion, right? It goes through a series of defense mechanisms for survival. So some people dissociate, some people just go deep within themselves and try to hide. And so one of the techniques my brain did, which continued on into the military, where I felt very powerless in the military personally, not because of the military, but because of the upbringing that I had. I learned how to hide in plain sight, quote unquote, right? And it's kind of a little deep to talk about. So, but it's just learning how to be invisible essentially and not live in your power. So when you hear people say today, take up